All right. My name is Paul Wells. I write the Paul Wells Substack. Who are you?
My name is Justin Ling, and I guess I'm dressed like I'm going on a singles cruise. But I write the Bug Eyed and Shameless newsletter, and now for a special kind of pop-up newsletter for the course of this probably upcoming federal election campaign. I write the Chaos Campaign newsletter.
Okay. Does one subscription get you both? Are they channels within the same newsletter?
They are. It's a section. It was a little wonky. I was kind of hoping to finesse it a little bit, but I accidentally kind of blasted all my regular subscribers with it. So I don't know. I'm still figuring out the gremlins in the code a bit, but yeah, it's a 2-for-1 deal.
Okay. We are here. Neither of us at Rideau Hall. We're both. Justin, you're at home.
No, I'm in the office. I'm in the office.
Yeah. And I'm in my office where I have a new sign. I'm very excited about it. And we're watching. I mean, frankly, I'm watching the CBC feed. As a bold independent journalist, we're just going to watch the CBC's live feed and talk about it. And we're here because it's the beginning of the Carnival. The new government of Canada is being sworn in today, imminently. They're all kind of in place at Rideau Hall. It has been damned interesting to see who's in Rideau Hall. And the government, the announcement said the government will be sworn in starting at 11 o'clock. We figure we've got a few minutes of shimmy before that actually happens. And I guess, Justin, the first thing that comes to mind is, to what extent is this government of Canada? How legitimate and how permanent is this collection of friends and associates?
It's a little legitimate, and it's not very permanent. No incoming prime minister without a seat in the House of Commons who's never won a general election gets to appoint a cabinet and gets to claim that it's somehow legitimate and has some sort of mandate to govern. It clearly doesn't, but it's not supposed to, right? This cabinet is going to be incredibly short-lived. They're going to come in. I don't even know if they even start writing any orders, right? They're clearly not going to bring the House back. Maybe they kind of come up with some contingency planning for some tariff orders, but this crew is an election campaign, right? This is not an intent to govern. This is not an intent to legislate or regulate. This is, hey, here's a collection of people who I want to associate myself with and who are in tough ridings. Please vote for them. Election comes tomorrow. I don't know. What do you think?
I said on a TV panel last night that this group is very close to being 20 people that Mark Carney might invite over to watch the Super Bowl. There's absolutely no guarantee that the Liberals will form the government after the next election. And there's a likelihood that he will have many new MPs to name as ministers after the next election. And so therefore, even if all of these people win their seats, which is hardly a given, many of them might not be asked back. And then finally, the business of 15 or 20 ministers. That will last until he needs more. Every government grows in office, and I suspect they'll be closer to 30 than 20 after the next election. But the big thing is, this government, according to the on-the-record statements of every opposition leader the last time Parliament sat, this government would dissolve on contact with Parliament. It would not survive the first confidence vote. And therefore, its legitimacy is, I think, shaky. But plainly, everyone who gets a vote in this, the Governor General, other world leaders, are treating this as the legitimate government of Canada. And therefore, it will be until this new prime minister decides to call an election. That's a pain in the ass to people who don't want Liberals to be in government 1 minute longer. But I don't think there's a legitimate rebuttal to Mark Carney being the prime minister until we get a vote.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, the NDP has put out this olive branch saying, if you want to come in and legislate supports for workers, we're happy to keep you on life support until you can get that done. Sort of suggesting that we could be in an election either in June or limp on through the summer. But apparently Carney didn't even pick up the phone and talk to them about it. So I think they know just how impossible it will be to do anything. But the temptation must be there, right? I mean, if this were regular times, if this were Trudeau still in power and they were heading to an election either in late spring, early fall, I mean, he would be tabling a budget. He'd be tabling a budget with a whole bunch of goodies, with a whole bunch of infrastructure money, gazebos in every front lawn, just skating rinks in every backyard, making for some of the most cluttered neighborhoods imaginable. There would be this desire to create a new CERB for the tariff era. And the fact that Carney is not doing that, whether he thinks he can't, whether he just doesn't want to, I think that's kind of interesting, actually, because the invitation is there for him to do it.
Yeah, it is. And there's the temptation of seeing whether the NDP would simply prop up a government indefinitely. Jagmeet Singh has been making contradictory noises on that question. And I know there's a lot of NDP voters whose strong preference is that Pierre Poilievre not get a chance to become prime minister. And so going to the House and sort of looking for another supply and confidence agreement, trying to govern until October, trying perhaps even to sort of bully Pierre Poilievre into supporting a government of national unity and things like that. The only problem with that is Mark Carney's not an MP. And if you're trying to put a new face on this government, you cannot put your face in the House of Commons. I think that puts the nail in the coffin of that idea. And we're going to be, God save us, we're going to be in the election trail very soon, 10 days or so.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, yeah. I think everyone's kind of curious as to when we're actually supposed to see a writ drop. And obviously, I'm sure you, like I, have heard all the conceivable dates, but I think end of next week is a pretty good bet. And competing visions about whether or not it's going to be end of April, early May. My money in the pool is on May 5th for election day. Yeah. But I don't know what you've heard.
That's kind of I'm betting May 5th. I'm making provisional plans for what to do with the rest of my life based around an assumption that voting day is May 5th. A little bit about who's in the room, and just this note: there's been a lot of speculation about whether Mark Carney is Katie and Jerry remote control puppet, whether Katie Telford, Prime Minister Trudeau's chief of staff, and Jerry Butts, his former principal secretary, have a big influence. I note that as far as I can see, Katie's not in the room. Jerry is sitting in the front row with everybody who does have a job title in the Carney government. Braden Cayley, who ran his campaign, Marco Mendocino, who's going to be his chief of staff, and there's Jerry. So if he doesn't have any influence, he certainly has pull with this group.
Oh, let me actually opine on this a little bit, because I think I do have a little useful insight. I've also just pulled up the stream where I can actually see everyone in the room, rather as opposed to CPAC's talking head. So this is great. Listen, I don't want to. Oh, David Johnson's there as well. I don't want to, read the tea leaves too aggressively. But we know that Jerry Butts was advising Carney. We know they're longtime friends. We know that Butts was encouraging. Former principal secretary to Trudeau, left under not the most pleasant of circumstances. I know for a fact that that Butts was offering advice here and there for Carney. I don't think he ever had a formal role in the campaign, but certainly was giving strategic advice. Brendan Cayley, you mentioned the whole Canada 2020 crew, which is kind of a mix of think tank, social club, data analytics, and campaign infrastructure operation. Canada 2020 was foursquare behind Carney the entire time, prompting a little bit of complaining from other Liberals. But I can tell you that, like, as far as I know, I don't think I know a single current PMO staffer around Trudeau who's actively helping on Carney's campaign, or who is going to be involved, as far as I can tell, going forward. I was in Ottawa for the election results. I saw a lot of PMO staff out. None of them showed up to any of the candidate events. They made a particular point of not going to those events. I caught Katie Telford and Ben Chin and some others at the Shore Club later in the evening. They were not at Carney's victory party. They had pointedly made a point of not showing up to either Freeland or Carney's events. So I don't think this is. I think, and you listen to, but I hear from everyone in the liberal world is Katie Telford is going to take, I think, a much deserved, much needed break from politics and will not be involved in the new Carney government.
Yeah. I believe that to be the case, and I absolutely hope it's the case, both for perceptions of the new government being at all new, and for Katie Telford's best interests. I think a long rest is well indicated and substantially overdue.
And just briefly, I'm curious to know what you think as well. I mean, collecting a sort of rogues gallery of people who were ousted or shunted from the Trudeau government is super interesting, right? Like Jerry falls on his sword and then gets not invited back after the
Yep.
2019 campaign. Marco Mendicino gets thrown overboard for what I think is objectively true, and I know he sees it as such, for getting screwed over by his department, which is not hard to do when you're Minister of Correctional Services, and then David Lametti, who's also coming back, who was fired from cabinet for no ostensible reason. This crew I think they're all very capable people, and were cast aside for, I think, very spurious reasons, and are being welcomed back. I think that is a big sign that I think is really fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I've got mixed feelings about Marco Mendicino. He's a likable guy. I admire him for standing very strongly for Israel in a riding where opinions are divided, sharply divided on that question. But that puts him offside most of the caucus. I mean, most of the caucus is not nearly as sort of pro-Israel as Mendicino is. He did get run out of cabinet amid controversy, which is over the
Paul Bernardo
rule and
transfer,
a few other files. Yeah, prison transfer. So he's not a detail guy, but I like that Carney's getting a chief of staff who is from law and not from commerce, who has been in Parliament and in cabinet for more than half a decade, and has some sense of how things go. Thinks for himself and is outspoken. I think that's probably a good choice. And then the other thing is, for all we know, Mendicino won't be chief of staff. Like even if Carney is prime minister at Thanksgiving, we don't know whether Mendicino will still have that job.
I'm going to tell you right now, Marco Mendicino is going to run for mayor of Toronto. Very confident in this assessment. So I think he's not going to stick around as chief of staff to the prime minister for very long, given that the infrastructure you need to start putting in place to run for mayor of Toronto needs to start getting built like now. You can't do both jobs. So I think that in many respects, this entire cabinet, this entire administration is it's a this page under construction sort of sign, right? Like it is watch this space for more information later kind of thing. It is like the ipsum lorem,
The
temporary
the
text
print in a layout page. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's so hard to look into the meaning of anything because it's all just sort of Potemkin.
I am surprised by some of the names that we don't see in this cabinet. And we stand to be corrected in 5 minutes. Maybe, maybe, who knows, maybe Jean-Daniel Lafont is there because he's the new finance minister, for all I know. But Karina Gould, according to reports from our colleagues, is not in. Mark Miller's not in. Jean-Yves Duclos is not in. Harjit Sajjan is not in. The latter may be less surprising. Karina Gould, what the hell?
I mean, listen. My suspicion is there's a couple things going on. It's a question of who has a safe seat. I don't think Karina's is terribly safe, but I think it's a mix of who has a safe seat, who wants the jobs that are available, and who has the let's say the self assurance to accept the message that you're not in cabinet right now. We'll find out a spot for you after the election. There's too many moving parts at the moment. There's just no world in which you boot a young upstart leadership contender who everyone had a pretty positive vibe about, you boot them from cabinet immediately afterwards. There's no bad blood there. There's no recriminations there. There's really no reason to punish her. I would be surprised if this was anything more than just, we're playing musical chairs and we just don't have one for you right now. Do you mind taking a bench for a little bit?
Okay. That would certainly be the most innocent explanation.
Yeah, give me the non-innocent one.
She was the only one who took serious shots at him during the only English language debate, and he is said to have thin skin. So eventually we'll hear about this. We like if people come back and spin that had nothing to do with it, that he came off stage afterwards and chuckled, "Boy, she's got a lot of spunk," whatever. But she went after him hammer and tong in the debate. There are other aspects of this, though, that could be useful. In her statement that she put out on X, she sounds like she is intending to run again. I would, if in her place, I'd be very interested in not running again, so that you can come from outside several years down the line, which is a path to leadership contests that Liberals are suckers for. Liberals love the person who spent some time in Elba and then comes back. John Turner, Michael Ignatieff, who had spent so much time out of Liberal politics that he wasn't sure where Canada was, and Mark Carney, who had been away from all of the frays and all of the catastrophes, and that turned out to be very useful for him. So I'm thinking this is an excellent opportunity for Karina Gould to be the presumptive favorite to lead the party in 7 years. But maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just that, look, we did the org chart, you're not on it. Hang tight and we'll get to you next time.
One thing that was striking about her campaign, though, and I was talking to a lot of people, both on her campaign and on other campaigns, was that you had this open door to be the ideas lady, right? You had the open door to be ambitious and visionary and kind of very braggadocio, let's say. Like you had a big invitation to be the larger than life candidate who was shooting for the stars. Well, you would call her just for simplicity, the AOC of the Liberal leadership race, right? She didn't do it. I actually forgot that she was pitching a guaranteed minimum income in her campaign because she never mentioned it. Right. Yeah. I was there for the English language debate. It's funny hearing you talk about, the fire and tongs or whatever euphemism you used, because I almost fell asleep during it. It was boring. I think you have to kind of describe her attacks, if you can call them that, on Mark Carney as being kind of pointed because although everyone's standing and applauding for the new PM right now, because otherwise I think it's the only exciting thing that happened in the entire debate. This is all to say that I think if she was really serious about mounting a future leadership bid, she would have used this campaign as a launching pad for the next one. And I didn't get that vibe at all. The vibe I got the entire campaign was, I'm running, I'm building my profile. I can't wait to go back into cabinet and keep working at it. It didn't feel like a big jump. It felt like a little shuffle forward. So I don't know. I mean, you might be right, but I don't get the impression that she's leaving. I get the impression she's running again. I get the impression she still wants to be in cabinet. Maybe she wants to be House leader. Maybe she wants to be something else. I don't know. But yeah, I have a hard time reading too much. I have a really hard time reading too much into anything. Although, if you look at the others who are in and out, Mark Miller, super close to the former PM. You probably kind of read in there that there is an attempt to do a little bit of break with the past. Harjit Sajjan, people in caucus have been demanding for him to go for ages. He just creates scandal wherever he goes. He's not seen as an effective administrator. Getting rid of him, putting him back to the backbenches, I think probably earns a bit of trust with caucus. And then I apart from that, like if you're going to shrink caucus by 10 plus people or cabinet by 10 plus people, some people got to go.
Someone's asking who are the people beside Diana Carney. That's an interesting question. I'll keep an eye out and see if I can answer that.
I didn't recognize them.
I'll say this before we talk about who is in the cabinet. It's upsetting to me that Jean-Yves Duclos is getting kicked out because I don't think he was ever really well used when he was in the Trudeau cabinet. This is a guy who had just been elected the head of the Canadian Association of Economists. He'd been the chair of the economics department at Laval University, and he holds a Quebec City seat where the Liberals don't have a long record of safe seats. And sure, he's nerdy, but I'll tell you a secret. Almost everyone in Canada expects politicians to be nerds. They don't get upset when someone is nerdy. And it bugs me that he's going home to Laval.
Okay, but here's the big caveat on this. When Carney came and did his big rally in Montreal a couple weeks ago, who was directly behind him? It was Stephen Guilbeault and it was Jean-Yves Duclos. When Carney has been hitting the hustings in Quebec, Duclos is everywhere. Super close during the leadership campaign. Clearly, the two got on well. And this is part of why I'm poking at the idea you can't read too much into these cabinet machinations. I don't think this is a sign of him not being used in the future. I think it's a sign of, we're putting together this poster of, friends of the Carney campaign, and we just don't have space in the poster for you. But when we come back, I wouldn't be surprised to see him as finance minister. I wouldn't be surprised to see him as, frankly, anything, deputy prime minister, you name it, especially for a prime minister, future candidate for prime minister who has garbage French. You need someone like Duclos. You need multiple Duclos. You need to clone Duclos. You need to clone. Oh, never mind. All to say is that I don't know what role he serves, but I feel it's going to be a big one. And also, that Quebec City riding he holds is not, it has gone Liberal bloc, I think even conservative over the last number of years. But if you have to look at Carney's poll numbers right now in Quebec, that riding is assuming the trend maintains, that riding is staying Liberal, and there's no chance it goes bloc. Carney is popular enough in the province that I just can't see Duclos losing that seat. So I do kind of wonder if that same conversation, like, hey, Jean-Yves, like, we love you, baby. We want you in government, but we need to prioritize people who actually could lose their seat. Now, does that explain why Guilbeault is still in cabinet? No, but this is not the perfect theory, I confess.
It's always interesting to see who other people pick as their friends. Just in life, right? Like,
it's true.
Here's this tiny cabinet, laser focused on the economy. Bill Blair is still in it, and Chrystia Freeland is there. Bill Blair.
We think Chrystia Freeland's there.
She's physically present. She is in the room.
Okay, all right.
So, maybe Jerry invited her, or I don't know. I think I expect she's going to be have her hand on a Bible pretty soon. Bill Blair, did you have Bill Blair, Ultimate Survivor, on your bingo card? Because I really didn't.
I did not, although this is the first job he's held, I'm going to go ahead and say ever, at least since before he became chief of the Toronto Police Service, that I feel like he's fully found his groove on. Like, I covered Bill Minister Blair at Public Safety, and I think he did a terrible job. I think he got led around by the nose by the RCMP and the other services. I think he refused to do reform when it was clearly absolutely essential. I think he bungled a bunch of files. I have really not pleasant things to say about him during his time at Public Safety. I cover him at Defense now. I genuinely can't think of a better defense minister over the last 10 to 15 years. I think he has quietly but effectively pushed DND into actual reform. He's managed to stabilize the top ranks of the Canadian Forces leadership. He has twisted arms in his government to ramp up defense spending even before Trump came into office, and then even more after he did. I really have great things to say about Blair, and I'm not surprised at all he's not moving, but also he's not. I think he's announced he's not running again. Is that correct? I believe that's true.
Was that
Bill Blair? Is he running again? Did he announce he's not running again?
Damnedest thing to put him in cabinet and then not have him run again. But I don't know.
Anyway,
it's not like these people are leaking to me.
Yeah, I thought he was a no, but maybe I'm misremembering. Maybe he is old as hell. Also,
Yeah.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is currently reading the oath. Well, I guess soon to be Prime Minister Mark Carney.
And it's a collapsible series of oaths. If you're a new a member of a cabinet, which he is, you have to swear an oath to
Right.
loyalty to the king, and then a second oath to promise to advise the king loyally, which puts you into the Privy Council, and then a third oath for your functions. I will be the best damn prime minister I can, at least until the weekend. And if you have been a Privy Councillor before, then you get to skip the second oath, and if you've been in cabinet before, you get to skip the first oath. And since Justin Trudeau became Liberal leader, these ceremonies have tended to be longer because you have an awful lot of people who are new to ministerial functions,
Right.
As I suspect Mark Carney is.
Yeah. And let me briefly correct myself because Bill Blair is running again. And to that end, I think you'd be crazy not to keep him as defense minister. If he might be the only through line from Trudeau to Carney, if assuming he gets actually elected. So
yeah, we've both been at the Halifax Security Forum. We hear how he talks about the pressing need to quickly ramp up defense spending. That bugs me because I see no evidence that is a cabinet decision that he's reflecting, and it sounds like he's sort of he's Howard Lutnicking. He's got a different message for the acceptable crowd than he does around the table, and I find that disappointing.
Let me push back on that though, because I have been talking to these people for a little while, including some people who are not around Blair, and I think I have a relatively good inside track of what's been happening over the last little while. So, like, for starters, Harjit Sajjan was the defense minister who helped draft our new defense policy, and it has become, I think, pretty well recognized that that policy, while ambitious and good, did not do the building blocks necessary to actually make those spending promises reality, and you're seeing the consequences of that now. You fast forward to Blair coming in, and he has, I think, tried to actually build out the spending and the planning and the defense industrial plans necessary to get all that stuff done. And every time he's gone to cabinet to say, hey, listen, need more money, it has been Melanie Joly and Chrystia Freeland and a handful of others who have said, no, we can't afford it. We have too many other things to do. Defense is not a priority for us right now. Yeah. And Blair, from what I hear, has been giving the message that you're hearing in Halifax to cabinet, and has been doing so again and again and again and again, and has been clearly more willing than maybe any other minister around that table to piss people off around cabinet, because who cares anymore? Bill Blair clearly is at the twilight of his political career. He has no ambitions beyond this. He has a mission, which is rebuild Canada's military. He has, I don't think, any aspirations for another cabinet post. If he gets fired, he gets fired. So he's just going in and saying, listen, we got to do it. We got to do it. And events have conspired to help him, right? So, as the war in Ukraine has gotten worse, as Donald Trump has come back into office, as the trade war has begun, he's been able to go, listen, I told you so. Will you listen to me now? And apparently it's actually having some impact. I mean, that's why you're starting to see this 2% target come down from like 2035 to 2032 to 2029, and maybe even slightly earlier. We'll see what Carney commits to. But I think Bill Blair deserves a ton of credit for this stuff. And I'm very, very reluctant to say too many good things about any sitting politician, but like Bill Blair, I think has earned my it's shocking to me as well, like surprising adoration on a lot of this stuff.
Okay. I'm just checking my email, and as far as I can tell, we don't yet have a cabinet list. It would be a little early for that to land anyway. Charlie, what can we talk about now?
I mean, yeah.
Oh, hey, if you are if you're watching this on the archive, which I'm going to post on my Substack later, and I assume Justin's
I will as well. Yeah.
It is 11:30 a.m. The Prime Minister has just become the Prime Minister, having taken the oath. We're waiting for the rest of the cabinet to get sworn in. We got 575 people watching, which is considerable. We had about double this on the day that Chrystia Freeland quit cabinet, but that was a what the hell moment. And whereas this is a little closer to being business as usual. So thanks to everyone for watching.
Yeah. If Mark Carney gets abducted by an eagle later outside in front of Rideau Hall, then I'm sure we'll all be watching this back and thinking how normal it all sounded.
I'm getting urgent messages from a friend about, I think, a political choice they have made. It's that time of year when we start to hear who's running for parliament. And the older you get, the more of these you.
Tell me about this. I just saw you writing about this. I mean, I think you have your ear to the ground of prominent Canadians who are thinking about jumping into politics, probably more than I do, especially around Mr. Canada Mark Carney. What's your vibe? Who do you think are some big names who we could see? I want some wild speculation here. Who are some interesting names who you think might end up jumping in the ring?
Well, we're hearing that Christy Clark is running. We're hearing that Carlos Letao, the former finance minister in Quebec, who was Philippe Couillard's finance minister, was the subject of the second piece I ever wrote for my Substack. He's been courted and he is thinking of coming back in some capacity. But a guy like Letao could be a very strong senior staffer. He might not have an elected role. And he's getting a little old for elected office, although like hardly disqualified. And he's damned impressive. He's very low key, very kind of steady on the tiller kind of guy. I don't. Beyond that, I'm not hearing what I assume will be surprising, less known younger candidates. And I think it's also safe to assume that there'll be a lot of those in both of the main parties and also some New Democrats. Like, I suspect some people are watching this and their fingernails are digging into their chair because we keep neglecting to point out that it's still at best a dead heat for the Liberals, and there's a lot of polls that show the Conservatives still solidly ahead. And a lot of Canadians don't even really know who Mark Carney is, how he walks, how he talks, how he makes decisions.
Yeah.
And so there's all kinds of room for the air to come out of this balloon in short order, depending on how Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives play their hand.
For the sake of running commentary as things are happening, Dominic LeBlanc has just been sworn in as Minister of International Trade and Intergovernmental Affairs. If you're curious about whether or not this is a demotion from finance, I don't know that it's been mentioned there, but I'm told that he's going to keep responsibility for the U.S.-Canada file. Again, with the caveat that they're going to be campaigning and not function. We're going to be in caretaker mode very, very shortly. So to some degree, all of this is academic. But nevertheless, Dominic LeBlanc is going to still be responsible for managing the trade chaos that's going on. So not necessarily a demotion per se. Also, we're not going to see Melanie Joly here today. She is staying at her job, but she's in Charlevoix, Quebec for the First Ministers meeting of the G7, kind of the opening salvo of the chaotic next few months, culminating in the G7 summit, where Donald Trump ostensibly is coming to Castanet. Please help me say the name of this Alberta town. Kananaskis. Sorry. Yeah. My apologies to the entire province of Alberta, the nation of Alberta, even. Anyway, Jolie's staying in the job. It would be literally inconceivable to move her because she's chairing the G7 summit right now. So even if you wanted to, you couldn't get rid of her. So anyway, just program. And there is Francois Philippe Champagne getting sworn in as Minister of Finance. I didn't see that coming, but interesting. I don't know what that means.
His first job as anything more than an ordinary member of caucus was as parliamentary secretary to Bill Morneau when Morneau was finance minister.
Right, I've read about that.
And Champagne would go. Standard joke is that he would go to the opening of an envelope. He would go anywhere in Canada where a representative of the finance minister was needed, and he would talk a lot. He's a very intelligent guy. He makes himself easy to like. He doesn't carry grudges. I honestly wish, for his sake, that he would talk about a quarter as much as he does, because he's a motor mouth. But he is. He studied something money related at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, he's very solid performer. I mean, remarkably for a guy who does not ever shut up. He almost never says something that he regrets later.
It's
So
true.
that's a kind of a super strength. Here's Anita Anand.
Minister of Innovation, Science, and Industry.
There's an Augean stable that you could go in and hose out if you really wanted to work hard. Like, I mean, I think the industry department has been layered ever deeper with programs that don't actually promote innovation and that spend billions and billions of dollars confusing people who would like to uh, who would like to innovate. And but I think in the short order, she's going to her job is to sound excited about what a great industrial country we have.
So this is interesting because I think you probably know this as well, but Nina Anand has not been treated great over the last couple of years.
Yeah,
I quite like her. I think she's super capable. There was pretty good reviews of her time in defense. Before Bill Blair took over, she was seen as kind of getting the ball rolling on unfucking a lot of the procurement problems and other things and some of the culture problems. The department hated her, but the department hates everybody. That's normal. Anand was moved at least once. I'm hearing twice because Jolie and Freeland and some others complained that she was campaigning for the Liberal leadership a little too openly, and that this was sort of a meant to clip her wings a little bit. Obviously, she didn't end up running anyway. But that sort of, assuming all of that's true, that sort of internal politics, I think, is a clear sign of just how non-functional the Trudeau government was. If you're spending your time seriously thinking about who's governing the country in what capacity based on how overtly they're talking about being the future prime minister, I mean, like, stop punishing us for your goddamn internal problems, right? Like,
yeah.
I think Anand is a very capable woman, and I think she deserves to get a role that she can stay in and actually work on for more than like 6 months.
She comes from a family of extraordinary overachievers, and I won't even try to say sort of what roles her siblings have had, but like they are superb musicians. They are, like there's a doctor and a lawyer and a captain of industry, and I mean, she's from a family of people who work their butts off, and she. I haven't had many conversations with her, but she's a very interesting person to just chat with. And she has seemed to have a hard time finding a comfortable place of advantage in the Trudeau government. We'll see whether we'll see how her week and a half in the Carney government go. And there's Patty Hajdu, who I'm awfully fond of, and is to the left of just about everybody else in the Trudeau cabinet and gets kept for the Carney cabinet. So it's not a wall to wall purge of left voices.
No.
He is trying to keep some balance in terms of who he hangs on to.
Now, this is interesting because I'm seeing her being sworn in as Minister of Indigenous Services. Some of the reporting yesterday suggested that this new cabinet was going to merge Crown Indigenous Relations and Indigenous Services back into one job. But ostensibly, this title suggests that it's going to remain split, which is interesting.
I'm going to need reminding. Has she been Crown Indigenous Relations until now? Like, is she moving?
No. No, because it was Gary, whose last name I have not learned.
And then Tangery, yeah.
Thank you, appreciate that. Who is Crown Indigenous Relations? No, he's Indigenous Services. This shows you how closely I've been following this completely scattershot cabinet up until now. I will pull up the list so we make no future mistakes. I'm curious to see that because I mean, I think there's wisdom in both. It really depends on how you do it. Crown Indigenous Services as a department is mess. There's desperate need to start seriously going into doing some of these new land agreements. And frankly, I'm not sure that having two ministers has made it better. So I'm curious to see if they do merge it or not.
If anyone gets a chance while the cabinet takes care of other business to go back and look at Patty Hajdu's shoes, those are some dynamite.
I saw those.
I think they might be flu bugs.
Hajdu has been Minister of Indigenous Services, but it's been a number of years now. So just FYI.
Okay. Wilkinson is energy and natural resources. So he keeps his job. So why is he getting sworn in? That's interesting.
I think oftentimes they're taking on new roles in their position, so maybe there's
yeah. Well, it's either here nor there. So I had him on the podcast because I was tickled by how he is suddenly the wants to be the salesperson for Canada as an energy exporting superpower after the Trudeau government had spent years, to say the least, being pretty ambivalent on that.
Oh, we have the full list. Thanks to Ian, who's posting it in the
Very good.
chat. I gather the list is somewhere online, but it's not in our inbox yet, which is annoying. Ostensibly, journalists are supposed to get this first, but
yeah. Well, I assume they've posted it on Twitter while we've been chatting, and.
Yeah. I'm still. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when Harper did that in 2013, and people's hairs caught on fire. The idea that you put something on Twitter first before everyone else knew, completely unacceptable.
So the only names that are kind of new to me: Ariel Kayabaga, Minister of Democratic Institutions and leader of the government in the House of Commons; Ali Assassi, Minister of Government Transformation, Public Services and Procurement; Kamal Khera as Minister of Health; Cody Blois, Minister of Agriculture. Cody hadn't been in cabinet, even in one of the super late Trudeau cabinets, I think.
So, and worth noting is that both Cody Blois and Ali Assassi were one of them more publicly than the other. I don't think I'm telling tales out of turn here. We're not big fans of the Prime Minister's Trudeau's reign in the last year of his government, and I think we're probably some of the earlier voices standing up in caucus and saying, "Come on, boss, it's time to go." I think there's a lot of hat tips here. To say, we recognize who in caucus called this correctly long before everybody else, and we're not going to, just. I think it's a sign that the Trudeau era is slowly ending.
Yeah. So Cody Blois, I believe he does pronounce it Blois, although I think he speaks pretty good French. Yeah. He was the guy who reported out of Atlantic Caucus to National Caucus with this code phrase that in Atlantic Caucus we had difficult and necessary conversations about leadership. And then he walked away from the microphone and left everybody to leak that code phrase to Althea Raj. And that was the first sign that caucus was done with Trudeau. I ran into Cody and Anna Gainey, the Westmount MP, former president of the party and a member of the Canada 2020 Circle, in a cloakroom at an event. Like they were checking their coats at the same time I was, and I thought, man, if Cody is showing up at an event with Anna Gainey, I think I've just run into the Carney campaign, and here we see. It's interesting that Anna Gainey is not listed in the cabinet, but at least Cody made it in.
I should also point out, Christopher Boyne in the chat makes a very astute observation. I haven't had my second cup of coffee yet, so I knew this. He's quite right. Everyone's being sworn in again because it's a new government, a new prime minister. You have to swear in the entire cabinet, even those who are returning their jobs. And of course, I do forget that Patty Hydrie was the Minister of Indigenous Services up until today, and she continues to be. So that excuse that brain fart for me. But yeah, what I'm curious about, because I mean, the obvious knock against Anna Gainey is that she's a Montreal MP. You don't need that many Montreal MPs in cabinet. What maybe I'll do the counting while I ask you this question. But what is the gender and the regional representation in this thing? Because I'd be curious if Carney is sticking to tradition here or not. There's Christina Freeland.
I'm going to tell you, I can't guarantee. Reading the names, I'm not sure the gender of some of these MPs. There there are some of what our former colleague Paul Adams used to call fake MPs, people who who never get discussed on Parliament Hill, even though they do have the job. So I'm going to have to defer to some of the scuttlebutt. I'm going to need someone to tell me what the gender mix is. The size of this cabinet is a little bigger than Bill, right? It's 24, including the Prime Minister.
Okay, so we're slightly under gender parity. I'm not including government whip as a cabinet job because it's not. So that I think that leaves us with 10 women in a cabinet of 24.
Okay.
Which honestly, fine.
Yeah, just as
the two men to declare this, but
yeah, just as it'd be fine if it was 14 women and 10 men. Like, I think if you're sort of within spitting distance, 50-50, and people always say that Trudeau prized gender parity over experience and competence, but I would say that more men got into trouble in that cabinet than women. Like the experience, I don't know about experience, but competence would tend to suggest that he should have had more women in his cabinet.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
24 is a little like if they're making a great show of a slim, trim, laser focused cabinet. 24 is a little heavy, but if you actually want to give people a little bit of experience getting to know one another as a government, 24 is still pretty compact.
I will say, if you're looking for regional parity, this actually is interesting. Because listen, I've become hostile to the idea that you need to have perfect regional representation. I think there's other ways of getting to regional voices into government without making, the Minister of Northern Affairs from PEI or whatever. But just looking at this really quickly, there's a lack of East Coast representation. I see one Newfoundland and Labrador MP, one New Brunswick MP, and then two New Brunswick MPs, I think. None from PEI. I don't think there's a minister from the north up here. I could be missing. They still have, yeah. Gary is Minister for Northern Affairs. I guess Mark takes on that job given that he's from the Northwest Territories. But I don't know. I find that interesting. I'm looking for ways in which Mark Carney is breaking with tradition, and this seems like a really hesitant step in that direction.
Yeah. Chrystia Freeland, what's in it for Chrystia Freeland to be Minister of Transport? To my mind, that's a rhetorical question. I think I figured it out. Like, Minister of Transport means Minister of High-Speed Rail, Minister of trying to sell high-speed rail, and she's also Minister of Internal Trade. So she gets, not for the first time, to run a victory lap after Anita Anand has done a lot of the work. She is, to the extent that the next election is a referendum on whether high-speed rail makes any sense, I expect she's going to be solidly on the yes camp for high-speed rail. Tim Pritchard, the former University of Toronto president, who is leading the high-speed rail consortium, lives in her riding, or actually one riding over in the riding that Leslie Church defended and will try to defend again for the Liberals. This is a cozy,
and then we'll try to win. Yeah,
this is a cozy downtown Toronto file, and Chrystia Freeland would be in her element trying to defend high-speed rail.
Listen, I will try to keep this as short as possible because I could wonk out on this for a day. There's two things here. One is that their plan for high-speed rail is, at least Trudeau's plan, is a mess. It's a mess. It envisions this completely nonsensical public-private partnership that doesn't really make any sense. They're going to have a 4-year development period before shovels even hit the ground. And when they finally get it going, it's going to be fully privatized and not within Via Rail. I actually think there's a lot of pain waiting for them when they actually go forward on this plan, unless someone steps in and says, "No, this plan didn't work. It hasn't worked in Ontario with the LRT. It's not going to work. It hasn't worked in Toronto with the Eglinton West line. This P3 model is just doomed from the get-go." I wonder if they're willing to reboot it. I doubt it, but I'm curious to see. And yeah, someone points out it's high-speed trains and high-speed projects. It's a good point. I'm really curious to know if she can manage that. And on the flip side, the internal trade thing is one of those things that sounds wonderful, but I think a lot of despair is waiting inside that pit. I've been writing about this because I was looking through some of Mark Carney's very, very light policy proposals to date. I was going through them, and some of them are just are those feel good policies that are actually, once you start getting into, you realize there's a lot of pain waiting for you there. Like we're talking about improving labor mobility for doctors and nurses. We have a doctor and nurse shortage everywhere. Letting them move from one shortage to another is not some panacea. And also, there's a lot of things that you have to give up when you start knocking down interprovincial trade barriers. I think that's a good idea. Are people going to welcome, the neutering of their provincial doctor and nurse associations? Is Quebec going to be happy that it has to give up its consumer protection law? I'm not 100% sure that everyone realizes the work that's going to have to go into doing free trade across Canada. I still think it's a good idea, but I also wonder if Chrystia Freeland fully appreciates how much of a sell job she has to still do on that file.
Yeah. And I have heard big bang solutions to our internal trade problems announced about as often as I've heard announcements that this latest Avengers movie is going to turn the franchise around. It is like James Moore, when he was industry minister, put like a year's solid work into dismantling internal trade barriers. They announced the Canada Trade Agreement, and I don't doubt that James put his whole heart into that project as a conservative working for Stephen Harper. And the list of exemptions from that agreement is the list that everyone makes fun of now.
Yeah.
And Anita Anand just announced an agreement some days ago that seems probably kind of provisional and is going to need. Part of the problem is that a lot of these internal trade barriers are not identified as internal trade barriers. Nobody has a folder on their shelf that is the list of internal trade barriers that they're sorry, but they have to keep in place. A lot of them are sort of business practices, manufacturing protocols, and they happen to be different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And there's vested interest in keeping them the way they are in your jurisdiction. So it's hard to kind of work those out.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's I think it's fun. It's a fun, easy thing to say. We're going to go knock down those barriers, but a big reason why a lot of internal trade doesn't happen is not because there are barriers up. It's because there's no infrastructure to move them. Right, like we don't really have functional east to west rail. Right, like when I to go back to the rail question, the big selling point for high speed rail in Canada should not be, well, I mean, part of it obviously should be, but it should not only be you get from Montreal to Toronto in 3 hours. It should also be because we'll free up a ton of rail lines and maybe we'll be able to add some more freight capacity to move things east to west quickly and more cheaply. And that to me is that is how you talk about economic revolution in this country, not with just, oh, we're going to make Via Rail obsolete and then we'll replace it with something else you'll hate, right? Like that is a nice benefit. But really, if you want to talk about long-term prosperity, it is more freight capacity so we can get fewer trucks out of gridlock, more trucks out of gridlock, fewer cargo planes zipping back and forth, more trains moving efficiently with critical goods.
Dave McGuinty's going to be public safety minister. It took forever to get him in, and now he's in that cabinet for as long as a Liberal is selecting the cabinet. This is a government that just in sort of its visage looks more business-like than some of Trudeau's early governments, right? This looks like more of Canadian establishment government than the governments that Trudeau tried to build, obviously with exceptions.
This is not a cabinet that's concerned with how many Instagram followers each one of them has.
God, please, that would be nice if it were.
I'm not making up that dig either. That is a genuine question that was asked or pointed out to cabinet aspirants under
Yeah.
the previous regime.
For all that, in the early going, it has also been a government that carries on Justin Trudeau's worst traditions of uh, uh, limited transparency, limited access, limited interactions with working journalists, pushing out message rather than taking questions and explaining itself. The Prime Minister designate, now Prime Minister, said on his way in that he would have remarks to make on his way out. We'll see. We'll see what those remarks constitute, and we will see in the election that comes after whether any of the parties has a traditional leader tour with journalists on a plane, whether those journalists are on the plane as a handy way to keep them separate from the news while the real campaign happens far from their gaze. I've been increasingly frustrated with modern communications methods. We'll see whether either party departs from those modern communications methods in the weeks ahead.
So I'm very happy you brought that up. I've been thinking a lot about this over the last day or two. And I'm going to put a pin in that and come back to it really briefly, only because I want to point out that our returning public safety minister has just gotten either a gift or a bomb dropped on his lap, depending on your perspective, by the outgoing prime minister, who very quietly and somewhat secretly over the last year was commissioning a study about the future of the RCMP. Publicly, the government had said the RCMP is fine the way it is. We're happy with how things are going. We do not need to end contract policing, the provision of RCMP officers to the provinces and territories. Hunky-dory, copacetic, let's keep going. They've commissioned a study basically asking a kind of a select SEAL Team 6 of academics to look at whether or not that's actually the case. The report kind of came back and the government quietly announced, like literally last week, maybe earlier this week, it's time to end the RCMP's contract policing mandate. The RCMP needs to be exclusively a national security and national policing force. That is a wonderful invitation. The RCMP is a disaster, but it's also going to be a mess convincing the provinces they need to pay more for policing because we have been giving them a really sweet deal to get frankly, garbage policing. But that would be a great place for the Mark Carney government to start on public safety if they get the chance to. I'm watching that very, very closely, and I'm very curious to know where that goes. But listen, back to the question of media. You remember back in the days when these cabinet swearing-ins used to happen. Afterwards, the ministers would come out one by one, and they would field usually a raft of questions. Right? They would get really grilled.
Yeah.
And then the Trudeau government started this practice of having them come out in clumps. 2, 3, 4, 5 ministers at a time, where they would take 5 to 6 minutes of questions, and they would each one of them run out the clock going, "Oh no, Gary, don't you want to comment about whether or not we need to invade Iran?" And they would run out the clock, and it would have all the trappings of transparency, but none of the practicalities. And I'm really curious to know. These are the things I'm looking for. Does Carney's team recognize how obnoxious that was, or do they realize the sort of PR benefits of it?
Every political practitioner, very close to every political practitioner, and just about all of their supporters in the public think the stupidest thing you could do would be to take a bunch of questions from skeptical journalists. That journalists, when it's reporters asking your favorite politician a question, that the reporters have no legitimacy or right to be so snarky, and that it's a matter of basic elemental self-preservation to stay the hell away from that riffraff. The couple times that I was so bold as to point out that Mark Carney was not explaining in detail how he would govern, I got howls of outrage from the people who were really eager to have Mark Carney be prime minister, and above all, absolutely adamant that Pierre Poilievre can't be prime minister. And similarly, I should say to the large number of people watching this who think that no Liberal has any right to be prime minister, that Justin Trudeau burned the Liberal Party's legitimacy for a generation to come, and that it's very frustrating to hear us talking about this government as though it has any right to govern. I see you. I know where you're coming from,
I'm
but
holding space for you.
but it's not our job to pick a government. It's our job to try and understand what each government is doing, and it'll be up to all of you to decide who the next government is in the next several weeks.
Yeah, that's right. And listen, I think I would like all of the aspirants to be prime minister to engage in the same kind of openness and transparency and access to media and even more than that, whatever. You can hate us all you want. Get back to talking to regular people, not people who show up just for your rallies, not people who have been pre-selected, not people who have been meticulously vetted to make sure that they have all the right opinions, but actual real regular people. Like, I desperately need and want our politicians to get back in the game of actually talking to regular people who don't necessarily like them. We have basically got out of this game. This was a mainstay of Canadian political life up until basically, like, let's say the pandemic, but maybe a couple of years before, right? Like, Trudeau used to go and do town halls, as did Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper would, walk into a Tim Hortons, and he was seen as the sort of low water mark of a guy who did not like interacting with the public, and he still did it more than the prime minister does now, right? Like, or I guess now former prime minister. I need to see politicians go back to that. Pierre Poilievre has signaled quite clearly that he's only really interested in hobnobbing with people who either agree with him or who are to the right of him, right? Hopefully he changes that during a campaign. Mark Carney is a guy who has, I think, always been sort of stage managed and who is maybe not always the most personable person. I worry that the plan is to have him cloistered, much like Trudeau has been for the last few years, especially if people probably want to throw rocks at him or whatever. Although there is this clip going around of Carney being chased by a Rebel News reporter, and Carney seems to actually enjoy dispatching with this guy. Maybe I'll post it later, but I don't know. I go back and forth. I'm curious to know whether or not they let Carney off the leash, or whether they kind of go true to form and keep him from being a little too real with the public.
So, and we're getting close to closing thoughts. I'd like to finish this conversation off pretty close to, like, we're a little past an hour, and I'd like to, all of these people have far more tools than their predecessors ever did to get their message out directly. Any one of them is able to do a Substack live video for an hour and talk about their plans for the government. They don't need us to be intermediaries. That's absolutely true. The thing is, they don't do that. The thing is, they govern in sound bites and slogans, even though technology gives them incredibly powerful tools to converse directly with voters. And the thing is, if you prep for hard questions from cynical reporters, it improves your thinking because it forces you to face your contradictions. And that's why I'm just going to be a son of a bitch about insisting that we still should 100%. Have a rule, and that if people step around us, they should take care to not also step around voters and give and to not give voters the runaround, and to not give voters the flim-flam. And the thing is, the temptation to do all of that is just so strong; it is very hard to resist.
Yeah, listen, I couldn't agree more. Like I said, I'm ready to think about Carney right now. It'll be out maybe this weekend, where I try to tackle exactly this question. And the basic truth of it is that, never mind your own electoral prospects. Liberals will keep voting Liberal, but we all collectively get stupider and meaner and more distrustful the less we have conversations, right? And I know that sounds kind of airy-fairy. I think my Carol Off book about the need to return to conversation is over there somewhere. but in a sense, scrums and one-on-one interviews, they're conversations, right? When people see our elected politicians having conversations, especially tough ones, they go, okay, great, I want to have this conversation too. There is a sort of lead by example thing going on, right? Like, we need to return to the ability to have actual conversations, not screaming matches, not like little running scrums that are full of like traps and weird kind of bug-eyed grievances. We need to get back to actually having earnest back and forths, and a campaign used to be the time to do that. The fact that we have banished conversations from the campaign, I think, has made them stupider, meaner, and more unpleasant affairs. And I really hope Carney recognizes the benefits of conversation.
Yeah. He seems to have recognized the benefit of conversations one-on-one. Like, I was encouraged that he sat down with the mayor of Ottawa and with the premier of Ontario. I sent strong tactical considerations in his meeting with Doug Ford. But in the meantime, he's talking to the premier, and that's a good thing. And look, if they don't want to talk to reporters because we're grubby or we're sold out or whatever, then the prime minister should go in front of an auditorium full of students at the Max Bell School or the Monk School or the University of Calgary or Seneca College or anywhere else where curious people are not yet convinced, and should submit to the discipline of trying to explain what he wants to do to those people. Final thoughts. How do you think this campaign's going to go?
Listen. You said earlier you don't know that there's going to be a plane. From what I hear, Pierre Poilievre is getting a plane. There will be reporters on that plane. I assume Mark Carney is going to do the same. If the NDP have the money, they're going to do the same. So it's going to look more like a normal campaign than the last one did. Recall, the last one was a COVID campaign. I don't think this will be the case, but I would really actually love this to be an offline campaign. You mentioned the kind of wonderful beauty of being able to reach people directly online. Yeah, great. Where so much of those conversations are kind of built to be had on Twitter, or Facebook. I think those are two platforms that our politicians should avoid like the goddamn plague, like to the point where I actually don't think that they should be posting on either platform for the entire campaign. I think they should come out and say we're going to boycott both, because Facebook won't let us have news and Twitter's run by a complete madman. Maybe there's some limited spaces here on Substack or on YouTube. Or, I mean, again, I would like to see the ban extend to TikTok as well. I don't think Jagmeet's going to do that. Anyway, I would really like to see Mark Carney say, the internet has made us completely insane. I'm going to go back to touch grass. I'm going to go old school campaign. You'll see me down the street from you. Don't look for me online. That is my crazy, wild kind of optimism about what this campaign should and could be. I think it's going to end up being really nasty, right? Like, I think Pierre Poilievre is feeling the pinch of watching his poll numbers slide. The momentum is not in their favor. They need to regain it. And I don't think they're going to do that by putting forward a positive policy message. I think they're going to go as negative as humanly possible on Carney. And the flip side of that is that I don't think he's going to withstand it very well. He has incredibly thin skin, as you point out. He has a kind of a petulant streak to him. He doesn't like having his record questioned, and he doesn't seem to like having his record questioned by people who he thinks do not have the same experience and skill set as him. I think he's going to punch back twice as hard, and I think it's going to be a very unpleasant campaign. And then in the corner, Jagmeet Singh will be doing his little Apple dance for TikTok. Yeah, I want to hear your closing thoughts.
I think this could be a really good campaign. It could be a really good campaign even within the character set of the leaders running it. Pierre Poilievre wants to tell Canadians how he wants to govern. Mark Carney has been watching prime ministers govern from a very privileged vantage point for 20 years and has a lot of ideas about how it should be done. And I hope that all of the leaders indulge their interest in policy and in processes of government. We could have a really good debate. We'll see how that works out. I'm working on some pretty exciting plans for how I'm going to cover this campaign. You have your own campaign vertical, a chaos campaign. And I do briefly want to acknowledge the tremendous good faith that all of these people in politics bring to their work. We snark on them all the time. They're almost all just working as hard as they can to do their best for the country. And I also want to, again, acknowledge the large number of people watching this and reading our newsletters who are terrified about possible outcomes. People who really think that Pierre Poilievre is Donald Trump and think he must not let near the levers of power. And people who really think that the Liberals have made an absolute hash of it and that they're just desperate for a change in government. And I want to thank all those people for indulging us as we're a bit more equivocal about things, because I honestly don't think it's my job to tell you who should be the government. It's my job to pay close attention to whatever government we get. And I think we're just going to have a hell of a month and a half ahead of us.
Yeah, and with the big somebody points out we barely talked about Trump. I saw this as a nice little vacation for my mental health. But I mean, obviously, it's a thing that's going to be looming over the entire campaign. Does Elon Musk show up to campaign with, I don't know, like Maxime Bernier? Does Trump spend the entire campaign tweeting about how Mark Carney's a globalist? Like, we don't know. It's the big unknown in this whole thing. Does he slap more tariffs on us because we can't respond during a campaign? It is the big unknown, and it's going to be hanging over the entire campaign like a sword of Damocles.
Musk and Trump and Vance are certain to campaign from the sidelines through this whole thing. And everything they say is going to be noticed and scrutinized and have an impact. And I'm kind of tickled by the fact that I actually don't know who they're going to campaign for. Are they going to campaign full-time for Pierre Poilievre? Are they going to decide on day two that
I want it.
Are they going to decide on day two that he's a pipsqueak and that he doesn't deserve it and that it's got to be Maxime Bernier, or that the country just like it's time to invade because Canada has failed? I mean, it'll be very interesting to watch.
Yeah.
On that happy note, while Ali Assassi gets sworn in as Minister of Government Transformation. Sorry, we used to do govern one way, but Ellie's going to come in and change it all.
We're thinking about a return to monarchy.
Yes. Thanks everyone for joining. Justin Ling, Paul Wells. We're going to keep covering this stuff because it's all we know how to do. Have a good day, everyone. I think this button ends it.
We're going to find out.